Happy Thursday. Welcome to today's Q&A. Couple things to start out with. One, a lot of you, and I really appreciate this, a lot of you put questions in the chat roll on WWGOA.com earlier, a day ago. That's great. Part of what happened, some kind of kerfluiness there. Jess was just looking at them, and some of those questions went away. She was able to look at a history and bring them back. But if you're scrolling through the chat roll and you don't see a question you previously posted, just retype it and I'll get to it when I get to it. But she did a very good job of bringing that stuff back to the forefront. The other thing is we have this wonderful Adirondack chair plan. It's one of my favorite projects ever. And part of what I really like about this Adirondack chair, you may have heard me say this before, a lot of Adirondack chairs, the seat is like this and the back is like this, meaning it's a straight line from the back of your knees to your butt in the seat, and it's a straight line from your butt to the top of your back. And this may surprise you, but neither your butt nor your back are actually shaped like that. So with this design, the seat has a compound curve to it, the back has a curve to it. It's an incredibly comfortable Adirondack chair. So scroll down a little bit. We're giving that plan away. You can click on that and grab that plan. There's a lot of summer left. So I recommend making a few Adirondack chairs because, you know, there's a lot of summer left. As always, a big thank you to Tight Bond for underwriting this and keeping this free for you. And I'm going to jump in on some of these pre-posted questions. Harold asks, how big are the rectangular plywood blocks you use to set projects on? Let me do a visual on this. I'm going to be right back. If you're not familiar, I have these blocks I often use. I'm coming right back. I made these when I was still doing videos at the old shop, so a bunch of years ago. These are they. So it sounds like what Harold has seen is it's not uncommon. If I'm putting a cabinet together, I might do this, lay the cabinet side across there, and then start putting components into dados, put the other cabinet side up here and clamp everything. And having it up on blocks like this allows me to get a clamp head here because the side is not sitting directly on my bench. So it's pretty, I use these pretty often. So the pregunta hoy, the question he's asking is, how big are they? I don't know. They're that size. 2 1/4 thick, 5 wide, and 10 long. I have no recollection of why or how I picked those numbers, and they're made from 3/8 plywood throughout. Kenny says, what types of oils can you put coats of polyurethane or varnishes? What types of oils can you put coats of polyurethane? We're missing a word. So it could be, what types of oils can you put under coats of polyurethane or varnish? Or, complete opposite, what types of oils can you put over coats of polyurethane or varnishes? Kind of doesn't matter because I don't know the answer. And my default position on finishing is if I don't know conclusively that something's going to work, I ain't going to answer. And the reason is by the time you get to the finishing step, you're in so deep that if I give you bad advice and that goes astray at the finishing step, that could ruin a lot of money and material and a lot of time in the project. So this one, compatibility between finishes is not one of my strong points other than shellac, because I use shellac all the time. But with oil and varnish, oil and polyurethane, I don't know. So that's, Kenny, you're going to have to take that to someone else. Sorry. Barney says, on dovetails, I am trying to freehand, but I'm not very good. I want to do through dovetails on 1 inch or thicker wood. Is there a way to do this with a template and router? I can only find bits and templates for 3/4 or less. So I am 99.9% sure I'm not checking my social status. I'm checking the Porter cable, if I spell it right. 4216 dovetail jig. And let me see if I can't find the specs on it really fast, I'll just stop. So yeah, accommodates stock as thin as 1/4 inch, as thick as 1 1/8. This is the jig I have. I just couldn't remember off the top of my head how thick a material you can throw in there. So that is the Porter cable 4216 dovetail jig. So that template used with the router will allow you to do dovetails in 1 1/8 stock. Mike says, best alternatives for retaining plexiglass or glass in cabinet doors. What's best for stained glass? Lastly, what if the glass breaks and you need to replace it or facilitate removing old glass? So, good question. Don't use, if you're doing a glass door, don't do a standard Copen style joint. So, let me see if I can do this for you. If we look at a door, the frame of a door, very commonly with Copen style, it looks like this. And then, of course, there's a piece that goes into that with a tongue on the end of it, whose profile matches. This is where the wooden panel goes. And that could be plywood, it could be a raised panel, it could be whatever. If you make this style door and you put glass in there, you have a couple of problems. One is the glass has to go in as you're gluing the door up. That's a huge pain in the butt, because now what you're doing is you're gluing the door, then you're sanding it, maybe staining it, applying a top coat, all of that with the glass in it. That's very, very cumbersome. Then, as he's pointing out, if over time that piece of glass breaks, you're in trouble because there's no way to remove it from that frame. So one workaround for this is very simple, and that is you can get door sets like this. I know CMT used to make one. I don't know if they still do. But instead of the profile looking like that, it looks like that. So it's basically eliminated this component. It assembles the same way. There's a coped piece that'll match this and slip in here, but it allows you to put the glass or the plexiglass here and then put a retainer behind it so that if you ever run into trouble with the glass, you can remove it, and you can assemble the entire door, and putting the glass in can be the very last thing you do after all the finishing is done. Stained glass, I haven't worked with a lot of stained glass. My mom had a piece, and when I made a frame for that for her, I used half lap joints on the corners because they're incredibly strong. Stained glass is very heavy. So I don't know if this is necessarily the best way, but I did it this way because it made the joints robust. So I did half laps on the corners and got those glued together, finished everything, put the stained glass in, and then put wooden retainers behind it. So the wooden retainer is very simple. It's really just a 1/4 round. That's pretty common. If we go back to the drawing here, it would be a little piece of trim that looks like this, 1/4 round. And then you can use brads to nail that into the door. Take the brads out if you ever need to remove that retainer in order to get to the glass. So that's how I did that stained glass frame for my mom. But look for your Google search would be glass door router bit sets rather than Copen style or raised panel router bit sets. Doug asks, my opinion on pinless moisture meters. I have one with pins. I can rarely get a reading. I see pinless ones priced from $35 to over $1,000. Are the cheaper ones any good? So I don't know. I'm going to be educating myself on this topic because I don't know much about it and I need to know a little bit more. So my answer today is I think there are good things going on with pinless meters, and I know some of them have, you can set them to different depths of penetration so that you want to make sure you get that you don't want to read the surface of the wood, you want to read the core of the wood. And there are meters that allow you to get that deeper penetration. That seems like a great feature to me. But in the big scheme of things, I don't know today a boatload about pinless meters. And the big question would be, what do you get on a $35 one versus a $1,000 one? I don't know. So unfortunately, I really can't help you with that one. Jim asks, I rarely get a chance to watch live, so I have a couple questions. I've watched several videos on epoxy, such as river tables. I thought I would take a class before trying it, which is very, very smart move. Epoxy is crazy expensive. There's a lot of nuance that goes into working with epoxy. So taking a class from somebody else before you work with it is a really, really good idea. I went to Woodcraft for one of their seminars. It was interesting. At the end, I asked about the best way to do this in my basement shop and was told I couldn't do it in my basement because I would need ventilation for the off gas. Either I missed that part of every video I watched, or it wasn't mentioned. That's interesting. I do a lot of epoxy work in here. I primarily work with TotalBoat products and stone coat products. The VOCs, volatile organic compounds, coming off of those, I mean, honestly, polyurethane is way worse than what's coming off of that epoxy. So here's what I would do, Jim. I would call TotalBoat and ask them this question. I'm a little surprised somebody at Woodcraft would say you absolutely can't do this in a basement because of ventilation. I think you want to have some air movement. If whatever epoxy you choose to use has high VOCs, you can wear a VOC protective mask. But I guess maybe what they're thinking about is that stuff migrating through your house. But when I'm doing this in here, there's I'm not running an exhaust fan when I do epoxy work in here. I'm not running an exhaust fan. I'm not wearing an organic filter mask. I am just simply pouring epoxy. So I would take this question to the expert. I would call TotalBoat customer service and ask them, if I use tabletop epoxy, how much ventilation do I need? He apparently followed up with, can you mention how much ventilation would be needed? I should have read that first. I have a jet air cleaner, but nothing vented to the outside. So you got to be careful with air cleaners, because unless there's a carbon filter in there, most air cleaners that hang from a ceiling are for particulates, not for organic vapors. So some companies, you can get a carbon filter in there, and it will also take those organic smells or organic compounds out. But just a conventional particulate filter will not help you with those fumes. But again, how much ventilation should I have? I would bounce that question off of Stone Coat customer service or TotalBoat customer service. Also, he says, I watched the video on the micro jig centering device for the lock miter bit, and it worked great for my setup. When I tried to use it in some end grain, it chipped badly. I have a Bosch 12 amp router, tried at different speeds. So with chipping, if you're in close grained hardwoods, you shouldn't get a lot of chipping. One thing that can help is, and I think I talked about it on that live stream, you can reduce the amount of material you're taking off by producing a little chamfer on that end before you do the lock miter cut. You have to experiment with that. You have to be careful. If you chamfer off too much material, you won't have enough material left to form a lock miter. But if you're in 3/4 inch stock, I often make that chamfer cut before I do the lock miter so that I'm not removing as much material. So something like that could help your chipping. If you're trying this in pine, you're probably going to get chipping because it's just, that's a lot of cutter. And even with that chamfer taken off, your the end grain of that pine is what's the face grain at that point. You're probably going to blow the grain because of the nature of that cut. And then he asks, if the bit needs to be sharpened, does that change the centering point? Good question. I will see Micro Jig at AWFS in Las Vegas next week, and I'll ask that question. I would think when router bits get sharpened, you never mess with the profile. It's the flat of the router bit that gets honed. I would think as long as that's consistently done to both cutters, both flutes, that material removal will be consistent throughout the bit, and center is still center on that cutter. But I will ask Microjig that question next week. Gary asks, spraying with an Erlex HVLP, I have to wipe the tip after each pass or it will spit. Using flow enhancer per Sherwin-Williams, happened with latex and solvent-based products. What am I doing wrong? So I feel like what's happening is on a spray gun, there is kind of a spear-shaped rod inside the gun that closes against the tip when you release the trigger. So I think what may be happening is when you let off the trigger, it's not closing all the way. So your gun maybe needs a good cleaning, especially flow enhancer sounds to me like you're using latex paint and you've got that brand of stuff, Floetrol in there that helps to help it level out. So anyway, latex paint can build up, it's a very viscous material. If that's built up and it's preventing your nozzle from seating closed, that could be what's causing the spitting. So yeah, I think it has to do with, I would mess with the travel on that gun, just get a feel for it. And two, when you look at the tip of the gun, I'm looking at my sprayer right over here. When you look at the tip of the gun, you should see that needle go all the way through the cap such that it's flush with the outside of the cap. Let me get the gun. This will be a little challenging, but I'll see if I can show you. This will be an interesting tight shot. So if we do that and that, what I'm talking about is right there. So when I pull back on the trigger, there's a needle inside that tip that pulls back with it there. When I release, it's flush. When I pull, it opens. When I release, it's flush. So when you release, if that's not coming out flush, if that needle is kind of holding back and not closing, that could be what's causing that spitting. And I would, Erlex is owned by Wagner. They're a great finishing company. If that doesn't do it, I would try Wagner customer service and ask the same question. What is the best glue for a homemade wood putty? Kind of depends what. So I don't have. Well, I've got this one. So if I'm mixing a wood dough and I'm mixing sawdust with glue in order to do that, if it's a lighter colored wood, I'd probably just use Type-On Original. If it's a darker colored wood, I'd probably use Type-On 3 because it's a darker colored glue. So it's not about glue properties really other than color. And Type-On does make a dark wood glue as well that is even darker than this original. So yeah, I would just, any of these wood glues will work to do shop-made sawdust-based wood filler from a properties perspective. But I kind of base it on the color I'm trying to achieve. I'm just getting started with CNC, computer numerical control. Is there a software choice you would recommend for a beginner? Yes, so for me, I have done a metric boatload of CNC stuff, and I have used Vectric's VCarve software for everything. I know other stuff is out there. People talk about Fusion 360 a lot. What I find with Vectric is you can do a lot of different things with Fusion. For instance, you could draw on Fusion and you could 3D print. You could laser burn. You could CNC cut. You could, I don't know, other stuff. With Vectric, it's CNC specific. I like that it's CNC specific because that helps keep it simple. There are lots and lots of tutorials that use Vectric, including on WWGOA, that incorporate Vectric. So it's easy to learn in that. There's a lot of online information out there about it. So it's easy to find tutorials for it. It plays nice with SketchUp. So those two softwares will talk to each other. So you could do your project drawing in SketchUp, bring that into Vectric. That might also be possible with Fusion 360. I don't know. But just from a familiarity perspective, I am currently on Vectric is the company, VCarve is the software. VCarve Pro version 12 is what I'm using right now. And that's their most current version. And I'm very, very happy with that. Paul asks, I'm designing a table using black walnut. I buy my material rough from a supplier where I hand select in person based on my material list. That is a great thing to be able to do. Very few hardwood suppliers will let you hand pick your material like that. That's cool. Do you have any advice for material selection? What advice do you have for milling and cutting black walnut? I've had good success with the material for small projects, but never fabricated a tabletop. So buy more than you need. I would, depending on if you think you're going to use walnut again, I would overbuy by at least 10% so that you have options when you're laying it out. When you're milling the material, I always do it if I'm building this table and it was all out of wood, not a steel framed workbench, I always do the thing you can see most readily first. So on a table, that would be the tabletop. And do it meaning I choose the material for the tabletop before I worry about legs or the aprons or the drawer fronts or whatever else, because I want the best material going into the tabletop. Once I have that laid out, then I work downhill from there with whatever material is left to make the other components. And then milling it, it mills like a dream. I don't think you have to do anything funky there. It will joint well, plane well, cut well. And probably the biggest thing is make sure you have good dust collection on your gear. Wear PPE as necessary. Some people react to black walnut. Don't put the shavings on your flower bed as mulch because they'll kill your plants. Unless you're trying to kill your plants. Don't use it as animal bedding because it'll kill your horse. So, but as far as machining goes, walnut, cherry, maple, closed grain, North American hardwoods, all of those machine joint plane cut very, very well. Norman asks, can the Christmas tree candy tray be made from aromatic cedar? And if that's used, what would be a good finish to use? Yeah, I would think so. I don't know what, I'm trying to think of the source of the question. Like, why wouldn't you? And then sealing, with most finishes, 30 days after drying, they're considered non-toxic. I would check that specific with the manufacturer of the finish you're choosing to use. With something like that tray, a wipe-on oil would be great, and it's easy to apply. An oil that's got some amber to it would help accentuate the colors of a cedar. So once you're in that zone, yes, I want to use, I think I'm going to use this oil, then contact that manufacturer and ask them about the food safeness, if that's an adjective, and for that particular product, and make sure it's going to work okay for that. Regarding tabletop fabrication, is there general guidance related to the width of the components? I've fabricated tops with 6-inch wide cherry and it warped, so I had to recut and joint it. I'm thinking smaller is better, but not sure what might be a safe width to avoid warping. So it's really not, it's not about the width of the piece, it's about the stability of the piece. If the material is, so if we turn the clock back to when I was gluing tabletops up in junior high shop class 50 years ago. Wow, it's a long time. The big thing was glue up a top, and if that's a piece and that's a piece, those annual rings are this way, these annual rings are this way, those annual rings are this way. That, so many woodworkers today, including myself, I've heard Mark Spagnolo say what I'm about to say. You don't need to do that. If the wood has been dried correctly, so it's not case hardened, it's stable, it has a chance to acclimate to your shop. Your shop, there's a lot of ifs here, your shop simulates the conditions in which that project will live. So my shop is not attached to a house, it's a standalone building. In the wintertime here in Wisconsin, I have to humidify this shop because our house is humidified. So I need the humidity here to match the humidity of where it's going to live. If you do if all of those things are true, then when you glue up that top, I like the 6-inch width rule. I'm typically 4 to 6 inches wide. That's how this ash workbench top was made. But I pay zero attention to grain. I don't think you need to go any narrower than that. I don't think your warp came from their 6-inch pieces. The warp came from they didn't have a chance to acclimate to your shop, or they weren't dried right, or both. So when everything is handled correctly, you can do 6-inch wide pieces, achieving the best face grain without worrying about alternating the end grain like I drew it there. We have an expensive white oak west-facing external door, stained and coated with a water-based sealer. The sun had destroyed the finish over 4 or 5 years. Would a non-water-based finish work better? So I'm gonna beg out a tiny bit, but I'm gonna kind of answer the question on this. And I'm gonna qualify it by saying I am not a finishing expert. I have anecdotal experience on what has worked for me over the years. So Let me get a thing and I'll be right back. Coming back, coming back, coming back. I didn't abandon you. Still coming back. Got to find it. I'm sneaking up on it. I'm closer. Almost there. Here we go. This stuff if you saw the paddleboard video, and if you didn't see the paddleboard video, you should go watch it. I built the paddleboard. This is the final coat on that paddleboard. So this is interesting. It's interesting in that when one makes a wooden paddleboard or a cedar strip canoe or a sailboat, you epoxy it, and that creates an envelope that makes it waterproof. Most epoxies are not UV resistant. So if I just took the paddleboard and I put it in the sun, over time, that epoxy would crack and turn yellow and all sorts of bad stuff would happen. So Gleam, and I'll show it to you again so you can write the name down. This is a TotalBoat product. It's a solvent-based varnish. Gleam is the very last step. And when that goes over the epoxy that's on the paddleboard, now it has UV resistance. So what I would do, the theme of this live appears to be call customer service. I would call TotalBoat and give them that exact same question with here's what I've got, here's what's happening, here's the problem. Because the other thing you're going to want to know is if you've got a deteriorated water-based finish on that door. So I'm texting Jess, who is doing a great job behind the scenes, seeing, what do we got to do? And then she just texted me, you're live. So here we are. So I'm very sorry. I believe what happened there is my laptop, through which everything feeds on this end, 2 cameras and the mic and everything, just decided to be done with life. It just quit. The screen is black. I can't get it to come back on. And so here we are. Now you're seeing my really messy office. So sorry about this. And we're going to wrap it up. And hopefully, before we do this again, I'm going to have to get a new laptop so we can get back out in the shop and do our live streams from there. So thanks, Jess, for chasing this down and bringing us back to live. And I'm so glad we got everybody the chance to see my really, really messy office.